was going through that nervous 90.
Sachin was experiencing what is a cognitive reframing problem around that situation. When you have clarity of thought, everything else falls in line. If you don't practice every single week, you cannot expect to get 100. This was an outlier data point. So my job is to always connect process to outcome, which means that if the process is great and the process is being optimized, even if the result does not take care of itself. And in that temple, I started to understand the power of the mind, the modern psychology theories, because remember, the brain is a creature of habit. It's routine. It will repeat the same thing. The two minds, the conscious and the subconscious. Conscious is thinking, feeling, emotions. The subconscious mind, there's no thinking. It's very fast. There's no emotions, there's no feeling. This team meditates every single day.
बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आप सभी का ऑन अनफिल्टर्ड विद निवेद। आज के जो गेस्ट हैं वो क्रिकेट से जुड़े हुए हैं, स्पेशली स्पोर्ट्स से जुड़े हुए हैं। नॉर्मली हमने देखा है क्रिकेटर्स से हम बात करते हैं क्रिकेट के बारे में, एम्पायर से करते हैं, कोचेस से करते हैं, लेकिन आज के जो गेस्ट हैं वो साइकोलॉजिस्ट हैं। माइंड कैसे काम करते हैं स्पोर्ट्स में, किसी की परफॉर्मेंस नहीं आ रही है तो वो कैसे वापस लानी है, और उस दौरान वो अपने आप से कैसे फाइट करते हैं, कैसे उस चीज़ से ऊपर निकल के आते हैं, और कैसे साइकोलॉजिस्ट उसमें हेल्प कर सकते हैं। बहुत अच्छा पॉडकास्ट है, इसको ध्यान से देखना। स्टे ट्यून्ड ऑन अनफिल्टर्ड विद निवेद। All right, welcome Shayamal. Thank you so much for taking out some time. And I had so many questions related to cricket and sports. And today I'm sure you're going to clear them, right? So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm definitely excited about having this conversation. It's always great when you speak to a fellow athlete because the mindset is very similar. And they understand the anecdotes and the energy that I'm referring to because your experience of the locker room is very similar to the reality that I live and work in. So always excited. Thank you so much.
That's true. So, so many questions will be related to cricket because, you have been working with the cricket team and you are a footballer, right?
No, I was a cricketer myself and a marathon runner. Now I'm the head of performance psychology with the Indian national football team. And then obviously I did a lot of work, almost 2 decades of work with the cricket team.
Ah, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so first question. What is sports psychology? How it's different from the psychology, main psychology? Is there any difference?
Well, psychology is really an understanding of mindset, and sports psychology is really and truly the understanding of the athlete's mind in context to the performance or the environment that he needs to perform in. What sports psychology is focusing on is optimizing focus, optimizing performance, optimizing clarity of thought, teaching people composure, helping them deal with the anxiety and the emotions that arise during that. And why sports psychology has become such a niche and such a prevalent subject for most people is because the margin for error and the penalty for failure in the world of sport is very, very small. So, which means that you've got 1/100th of a second to make a decision, and and that could be the difference between gold and silver, or you winning or losing, or the world knowing who you are, or no one even knowing who you are. So this is why sports psychology is so important.
I really wanted to ask this question to many people who can give answer. India versus Australia final, World Cup final. If you see team standard, India was really good in that way. Bowling part, fielding and, batting of course. What happened? Why India lost that World Cup? Was there any particular reason, mindset or skill set?
Yeah, the first thing is, we didn't put enough runs on the board. Bottom line, we started with that at first. And the game of cricket is such that you've played it, you know this. There's a minimum threshold that you have to cross. Minimum, right? On a good wicket, right? Minimum in a T20 game you got to put out is at least minimum 160, 170.
Yeah.
Minimum. If you're playing a 45-over game, minimum you got to get is 280. Right? 280 makes the opposition starting to think about their approach. When you score anything less than that, all of the pressure with how they approach it is completely gone. You know, so why was that game lost? That game was lost because right up off the bat, we just didn't put enough runs on the board. And at some stage, I felt we should have consolidated to try to get to that minimum threshold. Someone needed to take on the responsibility in the middle order to at least get that threshold there. Even if you slow it down, backthrow, do whatever you need to, you got to get to that threshold. If you don't get to a minimum threshold, there is just not enough pressure for anyone to even question what they're doing and how they do it, you know? And that is the fundamental problem, you know? Once we started in that way there, and remember, you can never predict how the game's going to start. You never predict one guy can get out quickly. You don't know what the conditions are. But after a couple overs, you have the ability to assess where you are and assess the game plan to get to that minimum threshold. It's really critical that you do that. You know, they were on top from the very beginning, and they just kept maintaining that pressure. And our ability to reset and relook at everything was not very, very poorly done. So that was why we lost that game.
That's true.
It could have it could have been different if they batted first. But unfortunately, that's just how it played out.
We have seen this, you know, whenever Australia is playing final, they play very freely. And when India is playing, they get lots of pressure, you know.
Because Australia have played so many finals and they have so much of experience. And you know, the culture of it is fearless. It's a fearless culture. You know, I keep saying this to everyone, you know, I was doing a post World Cup, the same World Cup you're speaking about. I was on the show that debunked the whole World Cup and broke it down with Wasim Akram and Sanjay Manjrekar, and we were speaking about this. And I said, you know, I've been in the locker room when India plays Pakistan. I said, you two guys have been there as well. You know that the pressure in the locker room, you can cut it with a knife. That's how much pressure there is. I said, the only two teams that have ever played each other in any World Cup, anywhere in the world, in any format of game, is India versus Pakistan in the first round. Every single time. They have to bring these two teams together because the commercial viability of this game sets up the whole World Cup.
That's true.
But the pressure internally on those teams is to bounce back from that, to rejuvenate from that, is phenomenally difficult. You know, and I said, you know, in that World Cup, when we lost, the other reason why I think we didn't do well was Australia had 2 losses getting to the final. India had 0. I started to get worried when we'd won 8 out of 8 games because we'd not understood how to bounce back yet. We'd not understood when a plan doesn't go well, how should the middle order and the tail end come in to recuperate us and bring that up. Australia had learned that twice because they had 2 losses. They had times to look at the formulas to test it. So they had solutions for going well and not going well. We went into that final with only one game plan that everything's going to go away. And as soon as it didn't go away, we didn't know how to reset.
That's true.
You know?
True.
So when you deconstruct a game, there's so many things to look at from a mental place, from all of these environments, and they all stack up. But these are the tiny things that make all the difference.
One of the frequently asked question, when Sachin was going through that nervous 90, what was the reason? Because he was having lots of psychologists, so many coaches, good practice, everything. But what was the reason he was not able to come out from that particular thing?
So the first thing we must understand is when Sachin was playing at his peak and when he experienced what was called the nervous 90s that we talk about it, psychology and what we understood about the brain at that stage is very different from what we understand about the brain today. You know,
Sure.
So me answering this question right now, I'm answering it with insight that I have around the science of the human brain today. Because it's very hard for me to project myself into that ecosystem and that world at that stage, understanding that piece of knowledge and wondering why he didn't fix it at that stage. Okay. So the nervous 90s, first thing was that it was a reality that played out for him. So from the time he got to 70, 80, he would have been thinking about that. So the mind would have been away from where it should have been, focusing on the now, to wondering how we got that. Once the mind went there, once he got into the nervous 90s, the second thing that happened was that the process that got him to the 90s, he would have tried to do something to change it, to accelerate that phase, to get past it, right? Now, what the brain would have been unable to recognize is that a process got me to 90, stick to that process, right? He would have moved out of that process in one of two ways. He would have tried to exactly slow it down, which means be more careful, or accelerate it by taking more risks. Both of them are actually very, very detrimental. Now, the third thing is that I don't know what support ecosystem he had for the mental game at that stage. It wasn't very, very well understood. Actually, quite honestly, in India today even, we're doing great work on the physiology. We're doing great work on the nutrition and the training. The work in psychology is still very nascent and very poor amongst our athletes. We're still not focusing as much energy. Now, can you imagine for someone like Sachin, who was dealing with so much of media pressure, so much of team pressure, and a lack of understanding around what is neuroscience and cognitive reprogramming and mindset, he had no resources available to him to actually understand the problem and deal with it. I definitely think if he was experiencing the same problem today, the solutions are much easier, because just a simple thing, he doesn't even have to do anything. We can put a skull cap on him, we can capture EEG data, and in 15 minutes, we can play a program that can completely rewire how he thinks to get through that. Technology has moved to a completely new level. So Sachin was experiencing what is a cognitive reframing problem around that situation, but at a time when our understanding of the brain and our understanding of the technologies to reprogram the brain were very, very limited.
I heard in one of your podcasts, you were also working with Sachin for some time.
I worked with Sachin during, like I said, 2003 at the World Cup. Okay. And I had a great experience with him because I was the only one who was throwing cricket balls to him. I every single practice session, it was just me and him for 2 hours or 3 hours every single day for almost 6 or 7 weeks that we were together in South Africa during the World Cup. Not a single bowler in the team bowled to him, not a single net bowler, not a single person even threw cricket balls.
Why it was like that?
It was just coincidence that it happened like that. At the very, very first practice session, we're practicing in Paarl because we are playing Holland. The wicket was a bit wet. A young schoolboy bowler bowled a bouncer. It popped up. It went over his head. The next ball was also on a wet wicket, popped up, hit him on the gloves. John Wright didn't want him to get hurt, so they pulled him out of the nets. And he asked me to take some balls and just throw to Sachin. And everyone else was rotating every 10 minutes. And Sachin, literally, I threw balls to him for 2 hours. And he had such a great practice session, that every single day he called me. And literally after a week, my job became, as a technical analyst, was analyzing pictures. But the core job, John, was like, the only thing you have to do is look after Sachin this entire World Cup. And literally that's what I did. To the point where I hardly even spent time with Dravid or Ganguly. I mean, I chatted a lot to the youngsters. We had Zaire Khan, Mohammad Kaif and Yuvraj Singh at the time, who were very, very young. They brought this vibrant, bubbly energy to it. We had Parthav Patel, who was a kid. He was like 15 years old, and we had Javagal Srinath, we had Anil Kumble. What an exceptional team, Ajit Agarkar. But these were the youngsters who were really there. The dominating energy was Saurav Ganguly, who was truly an exceptional leader.
Oh, wow. So is there any skill you saw in Saurav Ganguly? Is there anything which you kept with yourself that this is the thing I am going to follow in my life? Anything?
Yeah, that's an interesting question and a tough question. I wouldn't say there's something that I kept with me, but
Okay.
I really appreciated. There was an aspect of Saurav that we as a team saw that no one else saw. Everyone looked at Dada externally and they saw the prince, that was his nickname, the prince of Kolkata, Dada the captain of the Indian team. He walked with the stature, shoulders high. No one ever saw, there was this magnanimity to him as a person, But internally in there, he was very, very humble. He would listen to anyone. He would talk. He had your back. If he believed in you, he would fight for you. And no one else saw that. So the relationship between the youngsters and all of us in the team and Saurav was, he was very approachable. He was very humble. He was a hard worker and he was very strict and very stern. You had to do the work. But he was a good listener and he believed in you. The rest of the external world never saw that energy. So their understanding and the relationship of him was this person who was unapproachable, on a pedestal, a god-like structure, But the truth was that he was far from that. He was the most, humble person. And that was the one thing I took. And, he played already a decade and a half with Ganguly with Dravid, with VVS Lakshman at the time, who wasn't in that team, with Sehwag, with Venkatesh Prasad, with Anil Kumble. And he was able to bring a completely different energy to his interactions with them and with the youngsters. And for the duration of those 6-7 weeks, I think he understood really, really well that the success of this team is going to be on how well the youngsters do. So how well do Zaid Khan and Ashish Nehra bowl? How well does Mohammad Kaif or Yuvraj Singh finish? How well does Harbhajan support Anil Kumble? He understood that these 5 players held the key to our success. So he nurtured them, and he gave the senior players the freedom to just be. And it created a really, really beautiful dynamic in the team.
You have been with lots of sportsmen. The toughest mindset, if you talk about cricketer or footballer, toughest mindset who can go through any tough situation.
Yeah, in the tennis world, I think Rafa Nadal, who I've seen and spent some time with, is an exceptionally strong mindset person. The person also from the tennis world who now I have the deepest admiration, love, and respect for are 2 of my athletes from the tennis world. One was Sania Mirza, who's retired now, because the world just does not give her enough credit for how much she had to deal with outside of the tennis court to be that person. Coming from a Muslim family, coming from the first Indian female athlete that was really dominating the world, she was facing and being inundated with so much of pressure from the external world, right? That she navigated that with such character and charisma to be able to rise and shine in the way she did, was Sania. And the second from the tennis world is also currently world number 1, Rohan Bopanna, who is doing exceptionally well on the tennis circuit. Wow. He's the oldest person to win a Grand Slam, oldest person to win a Master Series, oldest person to become a world number 1. Just yesterday, he qualified for the Paris 2024 Olympics. He is the epitome of balance. He's the epitome of hard work. And really and truly, they all resemble the perfect mindset, different elements of the perfect mindset, but these are great guys. Coming to the cricket world, a South African person who I worked with when he was a coach, someone who's very famous in India as well, is Gary Kirsten. Gary Kirsten as an athlete, he would tell you this himself, and he often told us a lot, that he was not the most talented person in the world, but he was very, very hardworking. He was not very pretty to look at. He was not very flamboyant, but he got the job done. Really, really powerful. And I think if we bring that context into India, from a mindset point of view, it's hard to talk about mindset without mentioning the Virat Kohli of the world. His ability to bounce back is just exceptional. the amount of pressure on him all the time, but he navigates it with such grace, always bringing, always keeping the sportsmanship and fair play of sport in front and center in the mind in everything he does. These are the elements that make a truly great athlete. It's not the wins, it's not the losses. And very, 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 very important. And I'll tell you one thing. Just yesterday, we played a game. India played Qatar in a football game. Okay. And we were 1-up in the second half, leading in the 80th minute. A ball went outside of the field, right? And everyone stopped playing. But the referee didn't see that, and there was no VAR. And a Qatar player brought that ball back in, and they scored when no one else was playing. And the referee allowed the goal. So India then went 1-1. We're drawing at that stage. And as I was reflecting on this, I spent such a long time thinking about this here. And I was like, that contravenes all the fair play. It contravenes all sportsmanship. And I asked myself the question that night. I spent almost the whole night thinking about it. I said, if that was my athlete, how would I coach him? What would I tell him? Was the question. And I said, and I remember waking up that morning wishing I had the opportunity to speak to this young man. Because I would just like him to understand that, sport's a beautiful platform. Some people will be famous through this platform. Some people will earn money through this platform. Some people will be completely forgotten but succeed. And some people will create a legacy. And I said, those that will go on to create a legacy, will very rarely be the people who always had exemplary wins. They would be the people who showed courage at the most opportune moment. And I was thinking to myself, and I woke up in the morning and I called my whole team together and I said, there's a difference between matches in sport and life. I said, matches in sport, in any code of sport, in any game, individual or team, will give you moments. Moments when you can win or moments when you can lose. Right? Life gives you opportunities. A moment repeats many times in that half an hour, 1 hour, whatever. But opportunity comes very, very rarely.
That's true.
But for every opportunity, there is one caveat. When life gives you an opportunity, it also gives you only 1 second to make a decision.
Right or wrong. Yes.
1 second you have to make that decision. And that decision can either change your life or make you be forgotten. And I said, and I reflected on this moment, and I said, that young boy, I'm happy. Maybe he, for whatever reason, he did that. He needed the thing. He did. His team won. They progressed to the next round. But I said, that young man, I would have told him that you saw that as an opportunity to take your team forward to win that game. You took it. Straight after you did that, life gave you an opportunity to put your hand up and say no. And I said, if you did that, no amount of wins in your life would have even been able to compare to the courage you showed in that moment. That would have been your legacy.
That's true.
Now, will that ever rise again? The chances are very slim. So to be able to see the opportunities of life requires one to really and truly be still on the inside, comfortable with who they are. And my credit for being able to learn and master and see this is that time in the temple and that time in spirituality. It's the ability to unplug. This is critically important, Nivek. The more you cultivate that inner resolve, you will be able to see those tiny opportunities that can move your life in beautiful direction.
Beautiful. I got the 1 second thing I'm going to use in my life. Obviously, I try to use that. This is one of the great things. If you want to set a legacy, you have a 1 second. Beautiful. How you went into this, psychology, the field of psychology. What makes you feel that this is the right field for you? So, if you can just tell a little about you.
Yeah, sure. I am a byproduct of luck and chance. I grew
Okay.
up in South Africa, and in South Africa, I wanted to be a professional cricketer myself, but I grew up in the apartheid environment, which meant opportunities for people of color were not there. As a young boy growing up in an Indian family, I fought with my parents a lot to get these opportunities to play. And when that couldn't materialize because of the color of my skin, I immediately was stuck. And for the national team, you couldn't play for the national team. You know,
Okay.
it was literally an all-white rugby team, soccer team, cricket team. And all of this started to change in '94. So if you were really, really good in sport, it didn't matter. You just couldn't play because constitutionally you couldn't be selected.
Okay.
Okay. So that's how hard it was. And then that forced me into studying, and I studied sports science. In 2003, I went as a technical analyst with the Indian cricket team to the 2003 World Cup. I worked with John Wright, Saurav Ganguly was the coach.
Wow.
And I was a young boy. I was 23, 24 at that stage. I came back from that experience. We lost in the final to Australia, but I really thought I had a wealth of experience and stuff. So I applied for a job with the South African team that came up, and I wasn't given that job. It depressed me a lot. I came back and I moved into the temple for a little while. I spent some time at the Hare Krishna temple, almost 4 years living in there. I was still working at that time, but I was living in there. And in that temple, I started to understand the power of the mind, how much
Okay.
the mind can control the body. And that's what it is, through meditation. Vedic science teaches us how to control our mind to get that inner resolve, because you can't worry about anything externally. And spirituality, modern psychology was focusing on the external, and spirituality was focusing on the internal. So I learned that there. And that was how I pivoted from physiology to psychology. I went on and did a master's in psychology. I did a second master's in organizational psychology. I started understanding and specializing in team dynamics. And this was critically where that whole pivot shifted, because I understood that the way to peak performance is to have complete control of the inner self. Yeah, so this was where I sort of understood the power of psychology, and that's how I pivoted to doing that. But for me, coming from spirituality and spending time, my approach to performance psychology was very different. For me, it was weaving together the modern psychology theories with spirituality. I was very keen on bringing that spiritual context to every single team, to every individual, to helping them coach. And that was how I sort of pivoted. I didn't know I always wanted to be here. I found, life nudges you in different directions. That's how I found myself to where I am.
Yeah. So when you were doing this masters and studying different, things in the psychology, was there any thought that I will be working for the South Africa or South African any team, or what was the thought?
No, there wasn't a thought, but there was definitely a dream and an aspiration. And at the time, I was not dreaming of India or anywhere else. I was dreaming of doing everything in South Africa,
Okay.
because I was South African. But, when the opportunity came to work with the Indian Davis Cup team, my first international exposure outside of South Africa was working, besides India, where I worked with them in South Africa, was working with Mahesh Pupari and Sanya Mirza and Leander at the South African Davis Cup team back in 2007. And when they called me, I was living in the temple, and I took the opportunity because I realized nothing was going to happen in South Africa. Things were very slow. They were moving very, very slowly. And I was very disgruntled. So I looked at this opportunity and I took it on.
Okay. So how do you deal with person who's very good in practice? When you see in nets or when you see in the ground practicing, he's performing really good or she's performing really good. But whenever that person goes into the match, he or she is not able to perform. She just freeze. Where we can just work on.
Yeah, this is such a great question. First thing is, they always, in every sport, there are these people who are great in practice and they struggle to transition that into games. And there are people who are just poor in practice. And when they walk into a game environment, the pressure just switches on. They become a new person and they thrive in that environment. This is normal. And really and truly, first thing we do is we understand this and we accept this. So as a coach working and advising coaching teams, I make sure that the support staff and the coaches don't judge a person on the basis of practice, because a person could be good or bad in practice and that may not translate or may translate into games. So what I try to do is first take a blueprint of an evaluation of how a person is doing in performance and then superimpose that on what type of a practice schedule should that person meet. Coming back to the question of how does someone who doesn't transfer skills well enough, how do we help them? Well, there's a few techniques we can use. One is we try to ascertain exactly where it is. Is it because the quality of practice and the skills that they're practicing in a game are not the same as what they're going to do in a match? Is it they are too anxious? So can we reframe those emotions in some shape and form? Okay, is it a stress thing? Will it help if we decompress that stress? Then I also go back and I have a look, okay, maybe with the national team, the person coming from IPL or Ranji into the national team is not doing it. But then I go back and I see, has that pattern occurred everywhere? When he moved from under 19 to under 23, was it the same? When he moved from under 23 to open, was it the same? What was the gestation period of him taking to adapt to it? Because remember, the brain is a creature of habit. It's routine. It will repeat the same thing over and over and over again. So I'm looking for patterns. If there's a pattern, I can correct that pattern. I can understand that pattern and I can understand what's happening. If there's no pattern, that's when things become a little more difficult. So the first thing I'm trying to do is ask them to look back, evaluate, let me know, have you had the same thing happen? Now, Nivet, this is a very interesting question. 99.99% of athletes don't journal, don't document anything at all. They just go practice. Very few, less than 1% of athletes write down a journal. So there are physios that are keeping medical history and there are trainers that are keeping your training history. But as an individual, you are not keeping a history or a logbook of the quality of practice, the quality of performance, how you're feeling, all of that. Now, this becomes a fundamental problem because, like I'm telling you, neuroscientifically, the brain operates in patterns. Now, the only way you can identify a pattern is if you have information. Now, because the athletes are not capturing data, they're not logging in how they felt, they're not logging in the patterns of their performance, it's very difficult for a person like me to step in and identify the pattern. So we're looking at everything in isolation. So for example, let's assume that a cricketer is struggling with anxiety, right? And he has no data. I'm going to step in as a psychologist and try to help him do every single thing to curb that anxiety. But let's assume I had data from 5 to 6 years in every league he's played, every competition he's played, and I start to see that this guy is a slow starter. For example, Jacques Kallis was a perfect example of this. He started the season slowly and he really picked up speed. If I had that data set in front of me, then I'm not trying to teach him to curb that anxiety. Obviously, I'm working on his mental performance, but I'm also bringing him comfort that this is a natural pattern for how you perform. And I'm also asking the support staff and the coaching team to give him enough time. So this is how I'm calming the nervous system down, by leaning on patterns to help create the perfect environment for a person to thrive. But the biggest problem is we don't have enough data because athletes are not responsible enough in how they capture and how they journal and how they collect information.
So is there any experience? Have you seen any athlete who journal and who does everything?
I have a lot of athletes. I'm not asking them to journal every day, but I have a lot of athletes now through coaching have become, they track how their body feels every day. They give themselves a very simple score of, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling 2 in the morning or 8 in the morning. I'm feeling 2 in the night or 8 in the night. Then we're able to track what we're doing in the day. They come back from a game. They note down everything that went well, everything that did go well. They are keeping a journal of the minutes that they're practicing, the duration they're practicing, the time they're practicing. We can start to connect all of these dots. This is how we connect process to result and how we disconnect process from result in the same lens as well. So yes, it's becoming more of a habit. And the reason it's becoming a habit is because through things like the Garmin and Aura watches or the Aura rings and the Whoops, the physiological data is much easier to capture. So we don't have to do much. It's just there. Now it's about getting the cognitive impression and super layering it upon your physical performance and your biological data. Because we live in a world where all of your statistics are on the internet and all of your medical data is on your phone. So what's the missing piece we don't have is how you're feeling and what you're thinking. If you have that little missing piece, the entire data set becomes complete.
Would you like to share any success story where you saw that, that person need lots of planning and, journaling and everything, and that came out in a really nice way?
So, there are tons of success stories. Our Indian football team, who I'm currently working with, is one. This team meditates every single day for 30 to 40 minutes. We as a group do a lot of breath work, a lot of meditation. Every single day, I'm giving them reflection exercises. I'm asking them to think about something. I am getting their thoughts back. They are journaling. My football team, when I start every camp with them, we give them a blank notebook, a journal. Every day I'm asking them to write, giving them thoughts, encouraging them how whenever they come with me for a personal session, they bring that book. I'm looking at the words they're using, the language they're using. Language is critically important. So let me pause for a moment and explain this. Most people take the language they use or the stories they tell themselves for granted. Language is everything. So let me give you a very simple example for everyone listening. Let's leave the sport out. Let's leave the team out. Imagine Team A is playing Team B. Team A walks onto the field saying, I want to be hungry. I want to be committed. I want to work hard. I want to be determined, all of that. Team B walks onto the field. They're going to play this game and they're saying, we want to be alive. We want to be upbeat. We want to be energetic. We want to be alert. We want to be vibrant. Who do you think is going to win this game?
I think B.
Now, why is it that every single person, you don't know anything about the game, you don't know anything about the sport, you know nothing about the players. All you know is what they're telling themselves, and you're making a very good assumption that they will win, which more likely than not will happen. Why? Because the language you tell yourself determines the energy you bring to an experience. The energy will determine the outcome. Now, both of these sets of words are not wrong. No one said, I want to be lazy. I want to take my time. No one said any of those things. They use the right language, but each word means something different. And the one thing that through journaling and through coaching athletes, I teach them is the power of every single word that you utter to yourself. This is critically important. Every word matters. Every single word matters. And this is what I'm bringing to that team and getting them to evaluate through this journaling process.
How mental strength is important for an athlete?
Mental strength is exactly like practice. The mental strength is not cultivated in the game. Mental strength is cultivated in practice. What is mental strength? Mental strength is the ability to overcome boredom. That's what your mental strength is. Because when you get bored, you keep changing everything. To overcome boredom means you're able to repeat a process over and over and over and over again. And that's when you get better. The more you repeat something, the more you transfer that skill from the conscious to the subconscious mind, which is where sport is played. Now, mental strength must be cultivated and built during practice. Why? Because everything is mastered in practice. It's just executed in competition. So if you don't have the mental strength to overcome boredom and repeat a process over and over again, you will never become a master of that art. And if you never become a master of that art, then the conscious mind will always be intervening when you play in competition. And remember the two minds, the conscious and the subconscious. Conscious is thinking, feeling, emotions. The subconscious mind, there's no thinking. It's very fast. There's no emotions. There's no feeling. There's no nothing. It's just in execution. It's completely automatic and fast. Now, if you're not a master of your art, you're going to be playing sport from the conscious mind, which is very slow because it thinks, it worries about how I'm feeling, it worries about what that guy's going to do, it's premeditating. You've got no chance of success. So why is mental strength important? Mental strength helps you practice diligently for long enough to master an art so that you can trust that process in competition.
If somebody is there, you have a team or you have an individual, how you assess, there's something wrong where I need to work.
Something doesn't have to be wrong for you to still try to improve that team. You know, so and if there's a room for improvement, it doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong or something's broken. There's a big difference between optimization and when you're optimizing something, you're just making it work better. It doesn't mean that the existing system is broken. It could be working. It's just about making it better. Now, before we even answer this question of how I work with teams, what's really important is for us to establish the difference between what is high performance and elite performance for everyone listening. High performance means that wherever you are, if you raise your own personal bar in some capacity, you're a high performer. Every day you do something to make you better, you're a high performer. You could be lifting, for example, 10 kgs on a bench press. And the next week you go to 11 kgs, the following week 12 kgs. That makes you a high performer. I work in the environment of elite performance. What does elite performance mean? Elite performance means the bar is set. We know where the bar is. We have to cross it. So for example, if you want to play cricket with the Indian team, for example, if you want to play 50 over cricket, you need to probably have a strike rate of anywhere between 110 to 140, 150. You need to be averaging anywhere from 40 plus. That's the bar for elite performance, So you could be improving, and people are improving at every level of cricket. But for you to enter the professional environment, the bar to where you need to cross is already established. My job is to help you cross the gold standard that's already been established. Okay, so this is the difference between high performance and elite performance. I keep telling people, once you understand this difference and you know where you're going, it's very, very important. Now, it's also critically important that people understand this from the lens of their own personal growth, which means I could be improving every single day. And because you're improving doesn't necessarily mean you will have a job, you'll earn an income, or you'll play at the highest level because the threshold is being set. So once you understand that that's the threshold I need to cross, your entire functioning completely changes because why? The goalpost is set. So
true.
When I'm working with a professional sports team, for example, what am I looking at? I'm looking at the individuals and all the variables of how they come together. I'm looking at the team dynamics and the team energy. I'm looking at the potential of that team and where we can grow. I'm looking at how we can disrupt all of that. But the one thing that I want to stress on really importantly is I am assessing process over result every single day. Which means, let me give you an example. If you have a cricketer, and we'll use cricketing examples for the case of this podcast. Let's assume you were a batter. Were you a batter in event or a bowler?
Yes, I'm an all-rounder.
You're an all-rounder. So let's assume you're a batting all-rounder. Okay. And you got a game on Sunday that you're playing. Maybe a Ranji game or a professional game in a league. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you've been super busy. you didn't get to as many practices, you practiced for 10, 15 minutes, you didn't do anything, right? It was not the perfect week of practice. Sunday comes, you go and play the game, you batting 2 down, you go in, the score is 20 for 2, Nived walks in, you blast the ball all over the park, you score 110 runs off 80, 85, 86 balls. Absolutely fabulous result. I step in and I tell you, congratulations, but let's rewind everything. I congratulate you on the result, but I don't allow you to get happy about the result because the process doesn't match the result. If you repeat this process every single week, the result will not repeat itself every week. Which means if you don't practice every single week, you cannot expect to get 100. This was an outlier data point. So my job is to always connect process to outcome and disconnect them as well. Even if the result does not take care of itself, I will congratulate you. For example, let's assume you practiced every single day. You slept well, your biomarkers were good, you ate well, you did everything. Sunday comes, you first ball, second ball, third ball, nick off, you're gone. I would have come to you and I said, buddy, don't worry about it. The process is perfect. The process will yield results. So for every single person listening, the key to performance is to understand the quality of your process and how that's going to be connected to the quality of the outcome. And do you trust that this process will produce this outcome? And the worst mistake most people do is they associate one great outcome with a poor process. And the problem is the brain will play that on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. So your brain will constantly remind you, you scored 110 runs of 86 balls. It will not remind you that you didn't do in the work. It'll keep reminding you of that. And because you didn't do in the work, you will think that it's okay to not put in that amount of work and that result will repeat.
Beautiful. Actually, it has happened with me. I was practicing for the Prague trip because we go to Prague to play a tournament every year. So I was not practicing at all. And after 6 months, I went there and second down, I batted. And I scored 86 runs. And it was like many sixes in it. So I was happy that, I can, bat without practice as well. But as you are mentioning, I'm getting lots of good intake. If you're not practicing, this will not survive long. It's almost done because I had so many questions and I got so many intake for my life as well. And hopefully you also enjoyed, Shayamal, my silly questions. And
no, it was a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much. I really loved it.
All right. Thank you so much.